Moving now on to Edel. Edel Roddy was our first my life PhD student. We were fortunate enough to get part funding for Edel's PhD from the Care Inspectorate, showing their commitment really to this whole idea of developing practice and the PhD start. You've been with us now 3 years, Edel, haven't you? Nearly 3. Yeah. Sorry, yeah, she's due to complete shortly, so she didn't like to be reminded of that. But I'll just hand over to Edel, who's going to take us through her study, which is called Us and Them, Me and You, We. Lovely.
All about relationships. But it has a subheading. I don't know if you noticed.
Can you just say
Okay. Yes. Thank you.
I know that you're a wee bit quiet. Thank you.
So I don't know if you noticed in your paper, actually the newspaper grabbing headline for the presentation is claims that robots are being used in inspection, proving not to be the case. I suppose it's this idea of actually being a little bit provocative. Belinda mentioned in appreciative inquiry, valuing that provocation can help us to think anew. So when I was thinking about the newspaper headline, where this idea came from was in the study, actually members of Care Inspectorate staff shared that they sometimes felt that people saw them as robots, that they were automations going in without feelings and they weren't caring, and that this is one of the faces of inspectors, is that of a robot. And so then I was thinking, oh, will I share that today? Is that a bit risky? So what was lovely actually was that I was able to check it out with someone in the study and see how it landed with them, and they suggested that I do use it. Sorry, I just think. So when we were in touch by email, within an hour of me sending emails saying, what do you think of this? The co-inquirer in the study came back with this. So they came back with their understanding of humans in inspection and their understanding maybe of what robots would look like. So I'm suggesting that this is AI at work, but not AI as artificial intelligence robots, but AI as appreciative inquiry. And this I just so appreciated that I could go back to that person. The study has finished technically in terms of data generation, but the relationship is there that I could go back and say, would this be okay? Could I use this? And that they had the energy and the excitement for this, that they wanted to play around with it and see what that meant for them. So I suppose the invitation is there for us all, for within our own care settings. If we were to look at a human, what words, what might we generate for that? So now I'm afraid the slides are in maybe the order is a little bit off, but we'll see how we get on. So I'm just going to chat a little bit. Belinda mentioned that the study is co-funded by the Care Inspectorate, and touch very briefly on other studies in this area, and again briefly on the structure, the people and the processes in the relationship of this study, and then really spend most of the time looking at some of what is emerging in the study and what we're calling rich culture and rich conversations. Oh, this really jumped all over the place, sorry. So I'll just talk to this, the My Home Life UWS Care Inspectorate relationship and how that came about. Is that through the Leadership and Support Programme for Care Home Managers, a hot topic, a reoccurring theme within this was people's experience within care homes of inspection. So that was a hot topic within my Home Life. And simultaneously within the care inspectorate, there were a number of conversations happening around appreciative inquiry and curiosity around an appreciative approach within inspection. So those conversations were simultaneous, and then Belinda approached the care inspectorate with the idea of the PhD study, and the study was born out of that. So the name of the study is Enhancing the Experience of Inspection from the Perspective of All Involved Using Appreciative Inquiry. So now let's find, this is the next one. So in terms of within the PhD, I suppose one of the requirements or suggestions is that we look at the existing literature and see how maybe there is the potential for a new contribution to knowledge. So this is an area that there has been quite little research done on, even on an international scale. And the research that has been done, it has tended to draw on the perspectives or the experiences, particularly of the people in the care homes, but not on inspectors. Their views haven't really been sought. And how the suggestion that there could be improvements, but the actual how of those improvements to date hasn't really been explored. There have been 2 studies within the UK that I might just mention, and one was within the equivalent of the care inspectors in England, which is the CQC, and it was a PhD study, but it looked more really at is inspection effective really? Does it improve outcomes for people? And then a study that was carried out in Scotland in 2014, commissioned by the care inspectors, where they brought people together from a range of health and social care sectors and were curious about what their experience of inspection was like. So this was within focus groups, as I say. And what emerged from that is that the relational aspects were definitely highlighted, but also that maybe tension and anxiety were kind of 2 emotions that people frequently experienced in relation to the inspection. So this study is drawing and building on this previous research. So just to say a very little bit about the kind of the underpinnings of this study, and within the PhD, which I hadn't fully appreciated, it's a doctorate in philosophy, so we actually explore a little bit of what philosophy or what understanding of our world and what it is to be in the world are we bringing to the study. And within this study, it's relational constructionism. So this has a real impetus on exploring and really wanting to delve into what could yet become. So rather than look at what is at the moment, we're really, as Belinda was mentioning earlier, we're future focused and we're future forming. And then we actually are using what's called extended epistemology. So I was really struck by Julie mentioning about the hyper-cognitive culture. And you might say, well, within the field of academia, that's fair enough that we would actually draw on our intelligence as we understand that within in how we go about creating new concepts or new theory or new knowledge. Extended epistemology is an invitation to look beyond our cognitive processes. And I was listening to this podcast last night, and I didn't catch the finer detail of it, but my understanding is that there was this culture or this particular tribe, I think, and they were exploring what the mind is. And this tribe were particularly amused when people were actually using EEGs, so putting the probes on people's heads to understand the activity of the mind, because in their culture they will be placing those probes on their heart. And so I think this is some of what extended epistemology is actually saying that our ways of knowing, both as me as an inquirer doing the research, but also with the people that I'm working with, how we know is through our thought processes, but it's also through our experiences, through our practical skills, through our senses, our day-to-day relationships, and through different art forms. Already we've made poems here this morning. So these are the variety of ways in which we can know. Relationship-centred care has been mentioned previously, and I just want to highlight one particular aspect of relationship-centred care. So this was developed actually the same year as the census framework, and it's actually looking at some principles of relationship-centred care. It's this idea of personhood, of affect and emotion, reciprocal influence, and moral foundation. And it's these being principles that are relevant to relationship-centred care. So again, as has been alluded to, I suppose that within relationship-centred care, we obviously are really interested in the patient or the resident, but we also have an awareness around what might be the needs or the preferences of wider people, so the staff, families, other visitors. So I think it's maybe useful to highlight that relationship-centred care, the purpose is absolutely about creating the best life possible for people. relationship-centred care, though, has a focus then on the process of how we go about that. And it suggests that in that process, that everyone's perspective has something of value within that, and everyone's perspective being taken on board is what can help create that enriched culture. So we'll be coming back to these principles. Where will we go next? Appreciative inquiry. So we've touched on appreciative inquiry already, and I think within this study, which is looking at what could potentially be considered a little bit of a tricky subject, this experience of inspection in care homes, my sense is that using an appreciative approach has been really important in terms of people's buy-in with the study, and it's been something I think and I perceive that it has added energy and interest to it as well. So the people involved, so as I mentioned, we wanted to explore the experience of inspection from the perspective of all involved. So we invited care inspectors, inspection volunteers, care managers, care staff, resident relatives, and senior managers within the care inspectors. So we had 35 people in total involved in the study. And the methods, the processes we used were interviews. I observed some inspection visits, and we had group discussions. And this was all happening over the course of 18 months. And gathering these inside stories, I suppose, tapping back into that idea of the extended epistemology. So within our meetings, within our interviews, we used collage, poetry, took some photos, we used the image cards that are on display there, emotional touch points that are on that table as well. We used music and we used stories. That's that slide. So Brian is my timekeeper. 10 minutes left. Perfect. So I suppose I have some maybe caveats to sharing this. So as Belinda mentioned, I'm due to finish in October of this year. So these findings are still emerging. So what I'm sharing today is tentative in the understanding that it's ongoing and it's being formulated and reformulated and in ongoing conversation. So today I'd love to have opportunities, maybe we might have some time if people have anything they'd like to suggest or any new avenues they think would be good to explore. I'd be so open to hearing and really appreciate hearing that. And that what I'm offering today is something of what the study is suggesting, but there's more to say, so it's not to say that it's trying to present the whole picture. So I mentioned it's rich culture or rich conversations. So the RIC stands for Relational Inspection in Care Homes, and within this rich culture we had the principles that I mentioned. So these 4 appreciations are mapped to the 4 principles within relationship-centred care. So they're called principles in relationship-centred care. I think it's important that here we've moved to a language of their appreciations. So rather, as I'll mention, rather than being mandates, they're invitations. And those appreciations are the human-based inspection. So that links with personhood. You feel that too, links with emotion and affect from the principles. Ways of being together links with, can I remember? I think of it. And shared purpose links with moral foundation. Ways of being together, I'll come back to that. So just to say maybe kind of the lens that we're using when we're looking at this rich culture, and having rich conversations within this rich culture, is an understanding of the art and craft of becoming. What do I mean by that is, as I say, within relational constructionism that I mentioned and within appreciative inquiry, it's future focused, and it's this idea of maybe cliched but being on the journey. And I suppose out of the conversation that Belinda mentioned yesterday about using the Caring Conversations framework and moving that to using the language of becoming. So one of the 7 C's is about being curious. And so if as an appreciative inquirer, this idea of being curious is something that I really value, but I know that it's something that when I'm unsure if I'm getting it right or I'm unsure how I am, then curiosity can quickly go out the window. So I know that it's this constant invitation to becoming curious, and that so within all this rich culture, it's a constant invitation into something rather than being saying we can ever be at the final destination of it. It's suggesting that it's about a softening. So again, maybe that a little bit provocative to say inspection is about becoming soft, because I think people might find that alarming. So when we talk about softening, again it's this idea of the us and them. This idea, if we have what are our boundaries, what are our rigid understandings or rigid perceptions of what it is to be inspected, or what it is to share emotion in inspection, or the very us and them of people who inspect and people who are inspected. So can we have a softening of how we understand those boundaries, and can we explore them and see how we might like them to look into the future? So as I mentioned, these are about conversations rather than mandates. There isn't like a 10-step guide for inspectors, care managers and care home staff now on how to do inspection. There's, as I say, it's an invitation into conversation. And it's this idea within appreciative inquiry that we have this capacity to create our future together. So whatever our previous experience of inspection, it does not have to be fixed and stable. We can have a new experience into the future, and the way we can have that new experience is by exploring our relational processes. So again, Brian, keep me right in time because I will definitely go over. So if we're to look at each of the four appreciations, the us and them, the person and the role, and this quote from a member of the care inspectorate staff, and there is this sense of the us and them, and that will always be a part of inspection as such, that because there is a particular duty on the part of the inspector. What is underlying that? What is our understanding, as Julie mentioned, of what it is to be a person, what it is to be human, so that when we're interacting with each other, is there room for kindness and compassion, even within that understanding of an us and them? This idea of the me and you, being seen and being heard. I just love this example of a member of care inspectorate staff having a notebook, so that within this notebook they have recorded the staff members' names in their care homes, so that when they arrive on the day of inspection, they can ask for people by name. And it's that idea that the power that inspectors have, so the power of inspection is often talked about, but the power that inspectors have in terms of when they notice staff, when they notice beautiful practices, in terms of how that can really affirm staff, help them feel valued and help their confidence. And then a resident suggested in terms of how can we help inspectors to feel like they've been seen, so that when inspectors come in, the people are really sharing with them and celebrating with them the value that inspection is having in terms of improving outcomes for people in care homes. The being heard, and I suppose this idea of dialogue rather than, we'll say, simultaneous monologues happening. So this idea of being heard as being an experience where the person is listening to try and really understand what the other person is saying rather than merely react to what they've heard. So an experience for everyone involved of being heard is something that people articulated that they really valued. And valuing more we time, if we come to the we, relatives saying this idea of the human face of inspection and having more face time, actually wanting to see inspectors more, and this idea that if the care inspection process is really going to get to the heart of people's experience, that it's actually maybe a relationship and a familiarity with the role of the care inspectorate, with the care inspectorate staff, is actually what's going to help that to happen. So then we move on to you feel that too, and us and them. So this idea of containing our emotions so they don't see them. So people talked a lot about the range of emotions that are all flying around within inspection, but particularly inspectors and senior managers within, like senior staff within care homes, feeling like they have to suppress these emotions. So actually exploring, when is this idea of tempering our emotions, when is that in service of relationship? So maybe if someone is feeling really angry, maybe to act or share that anger mightn't be the most productive thing for the relationship, but are there other times when actually it would be helpful? So this idea of the us and them, and softening that understanding of what it might be to share emotion, that maybe we can come up with new understandings of what that might look like. And taking a risk and sharing how we're feeling. And again, right, the image cards and how they have been used within inspection. So both in terms of people sharing their emotions of the experience, so they could be used at the beginning of feedback, people saying how they would like the feedback to be, and then at the end of feedback, people sharing, using the images, how the feedback was. And so it's like they are a way into the sharing of emotion. There's some sense of safety that the card provides. So we're talking through the card and using that as a way to feel able to share emotion. So there's sharing the emotion in the moment, but I've also been really struck by this idea of, by using these images and by sharing emotions, we can actually have a richer understanding of how the images actually kind of can actually help create emotion. And by that I mean that if people have shared how they felt at the end of the feedback, so sometimes inspectors have talked about walking away and not knowing how people are left, and being concerned about that. So actually having that opportunity to actually hear how people are at the feedback can actually help into the future then, in terms of the care home staff feeling motivated and feeling like they have a clear sense of how they want to go forward, and care inspectorate staff having a clear sense of how the care home is at the end of inspection. And this idea that, again, Julie mentioned about staff having the safe places to talk about the very tricky ethical issues within care, and also can we also create these spaces within care homes. So this is a quote from an inspection volunteer who talked about their experience of, sometimes they're feeling like the relatives are talking about their experience of their loved one going into care, and maybe they haven't had that chance before, and so that's a new space for people with inspection volunteer. But then for other people in the study, can we create spaces of reflection where it's okay to share the myriad of emotions that are being experienced during the process? Moving on to ways of being together, us and them, and that we all have a job to do. And this is from a quote from a member of care home staff, and they're just really valuing how when the inspector comes, they're very prepared, they have a list, so it helps the care staff to know then what the inspector is asking of them, and it also is helping the care home staff know what the inspector's focus is for the day. So it's this idea within inspection of all groups having a role within inspection and having certain priorities for their day, but how can we be responsive and in tune with each other's roles? And really, actually, a lot of this maybe is about making it explicit. So care home staff making it explicit that they understand that the inspectors have a limited amount of time, and that there's a lot ahead for them to do the inspection. So how can they work together to make the process as smooth as possible? And sharing a little of myself with you, and this is a quote from a resident, and the resident is talking about an experience I had where I went in with the inspector, and the resident is talking about the inspector's personality came out, and that they were open and relaxed. So this idea again about some boundaries we might have in terms of what is appropriate to share of ourselves within this regulatory relationship. And this resident saying that they actually value a sense of who the person is that's coming in to inspect. So again, there isn't a mandate on what that looks like, but just could we are there spaces where we can actually explore how we might like to take that forward, and then going deeper together. And again, this conscious of the sense that obviously within inspections sometimes there can be very hard messages, and sometimes the dynamics can be very complex, and a really sense of how things can shift quite quickly depending on what is being found and what's happening within inspection. So this was a story of a member of care inspectorate staff was involved in a conversation between a care home manager, and the care home manager had raised a concern, an issue about an inspector. But within that conversation, the care home manager was able to share what they found difficult, and they were able to also ask the inspector to feed back to them what they might do differently as well, so that there was that openness to both share and to hear. And this idea of staying together then when things get hard, and maybe this idea that what does the us and them look like when again there are these difficult messages, and how actually maybe there's a perception that there needs to be distance in order to give these hard messages, but actually when can having a really strong relationship actually help in terms of when these hard messages need to be shared. And then the shared purpose, being open to hear and telling the positive stories. And so it's this sense of the shared purpose being what unites everyone involved in inspection, the shared purpose being the people who live in care homes have the best life possible. And the sense of the people want the best for each other within the experience of inspection. But then we've actually spent time looking at, well, what can help staff to have the confidence to share stories with inspectors. And a lot of that was related to how we actually talk about inspection on the maybe 363 days of the year that the inspector isn't there. So how do we actually relate to our experience of inspection? How do we share that within the care home? But also particularly looking at supervision as a forum through which people can actually have an avenue to actually articulate those lovely stories from their own practice, so that then when the care inspectorate staff come in, they're very accessible to the staff. They can very freely share with them what it is they want to share about people's really good outcomes. And then finally this idea of together we care. And I think it's been really struck me, if we go back to this idea of the robot at the beginning, but that the care in care inspection, and that actually the people who are involved in that care inspection process really care for the people who are living in care homes, and that is what unites, and that is what can give the impetus to move forward together. So rather than conclusions or endings, these are beginnings. And so keeping the rich conversations going. So Belinda and I have been meeting with people within the care inspectors to see how this can be taken forward. And we had a dissemination event a few weeks ago to share more widely within the care home sector and wider parties who are interested. And it's just, I really value the opportunity as well to share today, and just to share with as many people as possible. So the hope will be that there will be a final report by the end of this year, which you'll be able to share. And then I suppose, similar to other presentations, this idea that it's over to you. So we've been talking about the human face of inspection, as well as the human faces, the human hands, and that we all have a hand in taking this forward.